Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Freedom Factor. I'm Ryan. Sorry, hadn't turned my mic on. Today's episode I have an interesting kind of thing I want to talk about, and I asked this one question. If you can't tell from the title, which I'm still at time of recording, I'm still figuring out what I want the title to be, but I think I'm going to title it "What is Native?" It's an interesting question and one that I've been kind of mulling around a lot because it really happens mostly on Columbus Day. Yes, I know, very contentious. Indigenous Peoples Day, Columbus Day, whichever. I call it Columbus Day because that's what it originally began as, and it's not celebrating anything immoral or anything like that. I believe I did a video about this last year, but anywho, I digress. Matt Walsh, on one of his episodes, they were talking about so the big issue, and I'm going to do a whole video on this at another date and time, but the big issue is South Africa, and I'm trying to pick my words carefully because a lot of people get triggered. And let me just say this: it's the calls for genocide. When the president of your country is getting chants started in packed football stadiums, saying "kill the Boer," which Boer is a term for the Afrikaners, the white South African farmers that live there. And again, I will discuss this at a later time. In much greater detail because the situation in South Africa and the history, really interesting stuff, and it's really complex, and it's not something that's so simple to just summarize and say in the point that I'm trying to make here today. So let's roll this Matt Walsh clip. It's a couple minutes, so bear with me, but I'm going to play it in its entirety and then add in my critique. Now, I do, for the most part, I agree with a lot of things Matt Walsh says. I think he's very, very logical. He is dry. He has a very dry, sarcastic sense of humor. You do have to acknowledge that, and if you're not prepared for that, people see him as kind of, he comes off as abrasive. But really, you have to understand that a lot of what he says is purely sarcastic. Other things he says, sometimes the line is a little blurry with Matt, but I, for the most part, like him. Some of his puritanical takes, and I could do a whole episode just on some of the puritanical stuff Matt, kind of the stances he takes on certain issues, which do kind of conflict with my libertarian ideology. However, they're not too terribly in conflict with my Christian ideology, and that's another idea for an episode I want to do at another later time. The kind of nexus between Christianity and libertarianism, and how there's some compatibility issues, but also you can kind of reconcile the two and all that. But anyway, so to preface this is Matt Walsh from one of his episodes. I think it was either this week or last week, where he talked about the South African situation. But then he went into another point, and I think it's a really good point he makes. So I wanted to play that and then respond. So here we go.
The people who are native to that land deserve their rightful land back. That is not what the Afrikaners actually want to have happen, which are the white Africans, and so who are not originally from Africa, who colonized South Africa also. And so that is what they are saying is discrimination. Now, if the Constitution in South Africa is discriminatory, they have their checks and balances in that land, just like we do. And that is for them to, so if the Afrikaners don't actually like the land, they can leave that country.
They are. They're leaving to come here.
No.
These refugees are coming here.
They can actually leave and go to where their native land is, which is probably Germany.
Are you against them coming here?
Holland. Holland.
Now, the obvious problem here is that despite being given a national television platform, this woman clearly has no idea what she's talking about. She thinks the Afrikaners came from Germany. She's a complete imbecile, like pretty much everyone else on CNN. All she's interested in doing is demonizing white people, and she's going to do that one way or another every time she gets on television. But there's actually a bigger problem with this woman's response. I mean, let's pretend for a second that the Afrikaners actually did come from Germany. She's implying that in that scenario, the white people could go back there and she'd be fine with that. But of course, she wouldn't be fine with that. The left would not be fine with that. Take a look at what the left has done to Germany in the last couple of decades. If you don't believe that, I mean, it's unrecognizable. And any white person who complains is immediately labeled far right. They're condemned as white supremacists. The National Security Service has opened counter-terrorist investigations in every single one of them. And the same is true, of course, in this country. So this is the funny thing about who is considered native or not, who is considered an invader or not. CNN commentators have no problem announcing that white people whose ancestors have been in the country for 20 generations should go back home if they're in South Africa. But try telling the Somalis in Minnesota to go back home. You'll be immediately labeled a far-right bigot. Even though the Somalis have been here for at most a couple of decades, some have been here for a couple of hours, but we're told that the Somalis have every right to be here. That we're told the Somalis, the moment they step foot here, they are just as American as anyone else. The moment the Somali steps foot in this country, they're just as American as you, even if your family's been here for 400 years. And yet the white South Africans are not South African even after 400 years. And Americans who can trace their lineage back several centuries, they just have to shut up and take it in this country. No matter where they are, maybe you've noticed white people, no matter where they are always the colonizers and have no legitimate claim to whatever land they're on. In other words, under the left's framework, white people are the only demographic on the planet that can never be considered truly at home or native to any country anywhere. You know, we'll be told that a white person's true home is Western Europe. And yet, if any white person in the UK claimed that it was a white country, they'd be condemned. You know, they say to us in America that this isn't our land, right? It's stolen. So where is our land? They will not follow that to its conclusion and say that, well, Europe is the white man's land. They're not going to say that. So where is it? The message is that there is literally no place on earth that white people can claim as a legitimate homeland. A white man is native to nowhere. He is indigenous to nowhere. I mean, that's strange, isn't it? How does that work? Like, have you noticed that there's no country on the planet with white indigenous people? How is that possible? Where did the white people come from? Did they fall out of the sky like rain? Did they magically spawn out of thin air? If a white person could trace his roots back to the 17th century in this country, does that make him a Native American? I mean, at what point can the white person say, yeah, I am native to this country? How many centuries does he need to be? Does his family need to be in a country to be native to it? How many generations? 10? Is that enough? No. 15, 20, 25, 30, 40? Is that enough? At that point, can we say we're native to this country? And if the answer is, well, there's no amount of time, if the answer is that, well, it could be 1,000 years from now, and a white person who's been here for more than 1,000 years, their family's been here for 1,000 years, still is not native to this country in America. If that's the answer, then again, where is his native homeland? And if he goes there, can he claim the title of native or indigenous? Can he say that the non-natives are invading or stealing? Well, the left has no answer to any of those questions. And the reason is that the terms native and colonizer and invader and indigenous are all just tools of manipulation. They don't mean anything.
So there's the clip that he brings up some really good points. And Matt, if you ever see this, I hope that you would give me credit for prompting an idea for your next documentary. What is a native? He makes some really good points, and I agree wholeheartedly with a lot of his points that he makes. So the crux of the argument is, and a lot of people, and I will cover this at a later date, in greater detail, but really the kind of the 30,000 feet view of this is that predominantly Dutch settlers went to South Africa in like the 1600s and settled there. They set up farms, and then South Africa was I mean, it was kind of established as like part of the African colonization that happened. You've got nations like Congo and Rhodesia and South Africa, among many others, where Europeans kind of went to Africa and settled there, colonized, and for good and some bad. I mean, and it's a conversation for another time, but I mean, these white South African, or the white South African people, the Afrikaners, have been there for longer than America's existed. And so you're talking about generation upon generation upon generation living and improving South Africa to where they established a government, they established a state, and it was nationally recognized. And yes, they have some bad history. I'm not excusing or justifying apartheid at all. Apartheid was awful, but it's a lot more complicated. And apartheid ended in the 1990s. That was almost 40 years ago. So let's not kind of get too stuck in the weeds on that. That ever since they've gone for this kind of reconciliation, and it's kind of come full circle to what is happening today, where white people are being persecuted because they're white in an African nation. And I'm not getting into the debate of do white people belong in Africa, as it's pretty much kind of universally believed that Africa is a black nation. It's the kind of origination of darker skinned people. But Matt brings up some good points. The whole, like the pervasive mentality that there is no native land for white people. And he does ask a good question of, now granted, America's a little bit different in the fact that we kind of established this country as I don't want to say a safe haven, but like a refuge for people to come to immigrate to. And granted, yes, I'm not excusing any of the mistreatment that's happened to the Native Americans. But if you go back far enough, even they aren't native here. Because we have anthropological data that shows that Native Americans came across the land bridge from Asia thousands of years ago. So they settled here. And almost every country on every continent except Antarctica has seen some sort of, conquest and influx and migration of people from one place to another. I mean, it's not like people just sprouted up out of the ground, that they just evolved out of the ether and poof appeared here in this particular place. Granted, we aren't 100% sure on where exactly humanity originated, and whether you believe in the out of Africa theory or the Christian Mesopotamian theory. It's immaterial, because in essence, people move from one location to another for one reason or another. And you have to really kind of identify, like, at some point words become meaningless. Like, what is a native? I ask this all the time. Here, I'll use a personal example. I was born in North America. I was born in America. My father was born in America. My mother was born in America. My grandparents on both sides were born in America. Their parents were born in America. That's as far back as we're definitely sure. My great-grandparents, at least, were born in America. Now, I don't know my full genealogy. I don't know the full story. But from what I've been able to gather, based on, very limited but some detailed research, my lineage, as far as I know, my father's side predominantly comes from Scotland, and my mother's side predominantly comes from Ireland. And at some point, my mother's either great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents came over from Ireland. On my father's side, I'm not entirely sure at what point, but I also know my grandmother, she comes from Tennessee, and she's Scottish-German heritage. So there's some German in there. So my family comes from, at least, as far as we know so far, at least definitively Scotland, Ireland, and Germany. And so we go back at least 4 generations in this country. Is that enough to establish the fact that this is my home? If someone were to say, you need to give up your land, which I don't even own a full acre, but give up your land and go back to where your ancestors came from, well, then that begs the question of where then? Do I go to Scotland? Do I go to Ireland? Do I go to Germany? Where do I take my family? And then you have to take into account my wife and her family traces lineage back even further to where in her lineage is 2 signers of the Declaration of Independence. So if there are 2 signers of the Declaration of Independence, her family, at least to some degree, has been here since the 1770s. At least, if not before then. They could trace the lineage further back and say that they were here since the early 1700s or before. I mean, it's like, how far back can you go to determine someone's belonging to somewhere? And then brings in the other logical question that really kind of, no one's been able to ever answer this, and I've asked this several times in several mediums. I've asked, if I don't belong in America, where do I belong? And no one can answer that. And then, on top of that, if I belong elsewhere, would I be welcome there? And that's the thing that really kind of gets people, really unable to answer, because it's like, okay, so we decide that predominantly my lineage comes from Scotland. So does that mean that next week I could just pack up all my stuff, ship on over to Scotland, and they would welcome us? They would say, hey, here's your Scottish passport. We will sell you this land over here, this property with this house. And yes, go ahead, enroll your daughter in this school. Here's some career opportunities for you and your wife to be able to work and thrive in our country that you are apparently native to, and you can become one of us. Would that even happen? Is that even feasible? Also, on top of that, I may have Scottish heritage, but I'm American. I don't even speak the dialect. Yes, they speak English, but I don't speak the Scottish form of English. And I know that there are tons of phrases and terminology that I won't understand. And so, am I going to be expected to learn that? Or can I just continue speaking the native tongue that I grew up speaking of American English and not adopt Scottish English? Because we tolerate that over here, don't we? I mean, there's no real clear-cut mandate that if you come over here, you have to speak English, because clearly I've dealt with people, especially in my previous career in law enforcement, I dealt with people where I needed a translator because my limited reach in the Spanish language is pretty limited. And so I needed translative services to be able to communicate with people. And then on top of that, I've had to utilize Tagalog interpreters to deal with people who are Filipino. I've had to utilize what's another one that we've had to use a Somali interpreter before when I worked in the court system. That the person was from Somalia and didn't speak any English, which blew my mind. How can you be welcomed in this country and not speak the language? But I digress. So Matt brings up some good points. How long does it take for someone to establish native, native to a certain place? And then on top of that, you have these people in South Africa who've been there for generations. Their family goes back hundreds of years. So at some point 400 years, and you have to wonder. So you kick them out based on, and the fact that also South Africa has developed its own. In the meantime, they've moved away from speaking exclusively Dutch to this Afrikaans, this dialect that's sort of an amalgamation between Dutch and English, and so they speak with this different kind of language that is not native to their ancestral homeland. I'm sure they'd probably be able to get by just fine with speaking Dutch, but so you have to ask yourself, if someone is not native to somewhere, then where are they native to? And that's kind of a big issue that no one on the left can seem to answer. And so they say, and also on top of that, let's not ignore the complete hypocrisy that the left says, especially, I hate to say it, but especially like some of these people are critical of white people in Africa, and yet a lot of blacks in America technically aren't native to America. So are they going to return to Africa? Even though all the black people I know in America don't speak a lick of any language that is spoken in Africa. They speak English, American English. So if they're not able to converse, would they be able to be integrated into the society that they're supposedly returning to? And would they even want to? I guarantee you there are millions of Americans who are black that don't have any desire to return to America. I worked with a guy, awesome sheriff's deputy, mountain of a man. And, he was like, I think like 6'7", big guy, heart of gold, the biggest heart you'd ever ask for. And he was because he was one of the few black deputies that I worked with, he was kind of our, I guess I don't know what they call it, but the kind of like the cultural coach. He had to go through training and basically teach, and we had to do recurrent training every few years on non-biased policing. And so he was a anti-bias policing coach that they sent him to the training, and he even claims this black lady teaching the course told him, was teaching this class to train the trainer basically on non-biased policing, and she kept saying, "Ain't that right, brother?" And he looks at her and goes, "I'm not your brother. I'm more of a brother to these officers here than you." And she goes, "Well, us African Americans," because I'm an American. I've never been to Africa. I don't know what Africa. Maybe my ancestors came from, but I've never been there. My parents were born here in this country. And he made a very good point. He's like, "I'm not African American. I'm an American." And he goes, my color shouldn't matter. And that is the point right there. And so it's like this demonization of white people that, yeah, they say like, okay, go back to Europe. How can I go somewhere I've never been? I mean, I've been, but like I've never lived. And how can I return to my ancestral homeland when I've never been there? I've never been to Scotland. I've never been to Ireland. I've been to Germany, but it was in passing. It was not a long stay. I've never lived there. So how can I return somewhere I've never lived? I have no roots. I have no connections. I have nothing there. I don't speak German. I speak very little German. So if you push this narrative, it makes no logical sense, and it's completely bogus. And these people want to try and say that, you know, colonizer that we need to decolonize, and we need, well, at some point, how far do you push that decolonize? Because let's be honest, Muslims did not occupy a whole lot of the Middle East and a whole lot of North Africa until, you know, the Persian Empire spread, and then the Arab Empire spread. And at some point, you gotta kind of pump the brakes, because then, technically speaking, if you go back far enough, that whole little sliver of land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean originally was Israel. And so a lot of people on the left don't want to go there and say that the Israelis don't have any claim to that land, even though Jerusalem was a Jewish city long before Islam was even a thing. You know, we're talking before Muhammad. So how far back do you really want to go there? Do you want to say that, you know, the Germanic tribes that occupied Central Europe are the ancestral, you know, natives to that area? Then that means everybody from Africa, everybody from the Middle East, everybody from, you know, Central Asia who have immigrated to Europe, take a hike. You're a colonizer, you don't belong here. So do you really want to go there? Because I don't think so. People move. And as long as, and I've said this with the immigration issue, as long as you maintain your cultural heritage, but yet still adapt and integrate into your new home, there's no issue. Now, one thing I don't agree with is you've got all these Somali migrants and refugees coming in to places like Michigan, and they're not adapting to the land that they're coming to. When you come here, we're not saying abandon your entire culture, abandon your traditions, abandon who you are. We're saying you have to meet us halfway. And as much as people clamor, look, you know what? We can't change the past. America was conquered by Europeans predominantly, and I'm not excusing what's happened to the Native Americans. I have a lot of friends who are Native Americans, and I have a deep love and respect for all people. And Native Americans are just as valid as anybody else, but they were conquered. There's nothing I can do to change that. There's nothing we as a society can or will or should do to change that. However, that doesn't mean that they aren't welcome. And that doesn't mean that we should just make up for past ills that we didn't commit and, you know, all that. So there's that. And what really is a native? And kind of rolling into that is, how long does historical responsibility last? Because now there's this new call, and it's been a thing that's been coming up every few years, and it's come up again, is this idea of reparations. That descendants of slaves deserve reparations because they've been held down. Well, no, not anymore. Not currently. And also, how far back do we go on this? I mean, because if you really go back far enough, just about every group, every nation has had some form of slavery. There were the Barbary pirates in North Africa that had white slaves. There are still slaves today. but we focus so much on the African slave trade into North America because somehow that particular version of slavery was somehow the most egregious, even though there were slaves in ancient China, there were slaves in the ancient Middle East, ancient Persia, Rome, Greek. I mean, just everywhere has had slavery at some point. And so do we owe reparations to every people? My heritage, Irish, they were slaves in indentured servitude. That's just as bad. Do we get reparations for that? If I discover that I had, a lineage somewhere in my ancestry that were Irish slaves, do I get reparations? Or is it just because they didn't participate, they weren't a part of the African chattel slave trade into America, that we're ineligible for that? And then also on top of that, the level of responsibility kind of I have to question, because I've never owned slaves. As far as I know, no one in my immediate family has ever owned slaves. I know that my great-grandparents didn't own slaves. So to whom do I owe reparations if I've never personally participated in any form of slavery? How am I responsible for what? Do the sins of the father pass down to the son? So if at some point we discover in my, lineage, great-great-grandparents from Tennessee owned slaves, so do I have to personally pay for their acts, their misdeeds? And then to whom? That's the other question. How do people who've never owned slaves owe reparations to people who never were slaves? Like, no living person today was ever a slave. Not one. And so I can't be responsible for what I didn't do, and they can't be eligible for something that was never done to them personally. And so that's why the whole reparations thing is just ridiculous. And haven't we made up for that? Didn't we make up for slavery, all the ill wills of slavery and the pre-civil rights era? Didn't we make up for that, though? Pass the Civil Rights Act, and then they push this DEI and affirmative action to make up for all that, right? So did that not fix things? Did Barack Obama, who is literally a descendant of Kenyans, and never mind that his mother was white, but the first black president, and again on the race thing, like, just one drop makes you that, apparently. Like, we forget the fact that Barack Obama's mother is white. He is, if your father is black, then you're all the way black. That I don't understand. But he is the first actual, like, definitive mixed race president. So if that happened, didn't we overcome? Didn't we achieve what all the civil rights heroes, all those great champions of equality, didn't we achieve it? We've achieved, racial enlightenment in America, that we have elected. We have several black, we've got a black justice on the Supreme Court, 2 of them. We've got several black legislators. We've had several black heads of different departments and areas. I mean, Dr. Ben Carson was the Secretary of HUD. Do we not? I mean, we've had some of our greatest military leaders. General Colin Powell, a black man. I did a report on him in high school. He was an American hero, and he overcame. Dr. Ben Carson overcame. We've had these champions of all these various different forms of our life who have overcome this adversity to become some of the greats. Michael Jordan is a household name. His likeness is on shoes. You don't get much better than that. Tiger Woods, one of the highest paid athletes in the history of sports. Did we not overcome? I don't think. And the other part is, what will reparations really accomplish? Just giving people money like, hey, we're sorry about what happened. Here's some money. Is that really going to help them? Because there's going to be a large segment of the population that's going to get that money and just be completely irresponsible with it. And it would happen to anybody. It doesn't just have to be black people. You give a group of white people, and call it anywhere. It could be in Utah or Mississippi or Florida. Careful in some parts of Florida. They might jack up their truck and put big mud tires on it. But there's a lot of people who are going to take that money and they're not going to spend it wisely. They're not going to use that money to overcome whatever adversity and maybe start a business or do something, invest it or build a school or anything like that. No, they're probably going to blow it on themselves. A lot of people are. A lot of people would. And I mean, I'm not saying I'd be any different. I would, if I got a bunch of money from the government free without any strings attached, without having to earn it, I might buy me some stuff. I might buy me a new car. I don't know. So that's the problem there, is it really going to help them? Is reparations really going to help them? Or is it just taking, and the other problem is they tell us all the time that there's this systemic racism in our society. So giving you money probably is not going to help the cause, is it? If there's this systemic racism and then now you're moving up in economic stature, is that going to help you? Because now you're just a rich person getting subjugated by the government or by this racist society. And so the whole thing about, nativism and reparations, and if, I'm reminded constantly of the Morgan Freeman interview where the interviewer asks him, he says, do you want a Black History Month? And he said, no. Black history is American history. And I'm 100% in agreement with that. I mean, you can't teach American history without incorporating everything. And schools are kind of okay on this. I've learned a lot, like, some great inventions come from all aspects. I mean, the refrigerator is credited as being invented by a black person. The traffic light, a ton of inventions came from people of different races. And so that is part of American history. That is part of our heritage. Yes, there has been some bad things in our history. Name one country that has not had some blemishes in its history, some really dark times, some bad things that they've done in the past. Looking at you, Germany. Looking at you, Japan. They've got some bad history. China has some bad history. Mongolia has some bad history. Iran has some bad history. Saudi Arabia. Every country on the planet has some sort of misdeeds in their historical context. So you can't just say that, you can't condemn the entirety of it based on these bad deeds. It's where they grew out of that. And Morgan Freeman says it perfectly. He asked the interviewer, when's White History Month? And the guy said, well, I'm Jewish. And he goes, okay, when's Jewish History Month? And he goes, there isn't one. He's like, do you want one? And he said, no. And he goes, well, I don't want a Black History Month. And then he asked the most poignant question. I think Morgan Freeman's response, and I should have just brought up the clip and shared it, but Morgan Freeman's response was perfect. He goes, the interviewer asked him, how do we fix the issue of racism in America? And Morgan Freeman says, just stop talking about it. I'm going to ask you to not refer to me as a black man. And conversely, I won't refer to you as a white man. God bless you, Morgan Freeman. I mean, that's why he's one of my favorite people on earth. He's just, not only is he a good actor, but he's a brilliant person and he's got a good soul, a good heart. He's a good person. And yes, we should look past that. I remember growing up, I thought we were on our way to being a post-racial society. I honestly did. I thought that America we had moved on from the ills of the past, the misdeeds of our past, where, people were treated differently because of the color of their skin. And, growing up in the 80s and 90s, I saw that it was like nobody cared what color you were. You didn't push for people to be divided by color. You said we're all Americans. We all kind of came together and we agreed we were all Americans. And it doesn't matter what you look like. It matters who you are and what you do. And that's the way it should be. And so this whole reparations and this whole, what is a native it's just noise. And we need to move past that because honestly, it doesn't accomplish anything. I mean, yes, I wholeheartedly embrace your heritage, embrace your culture, be proud of who you are and where your family and your lineage came from. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of my Scottish heritage. I think that's a really cool aspect. I have a kilt. I wear it on special occasions and I'm proud of that heritage. I'm proud of my family. I'm proud of all the accomplishments that people in my family have done. My grandfather on my mother's side worked for Boeing during World War II. He couldn't go overseas because he was that specialized in his field, working for Boeing, that he could not. They straight up said, you are not to go enlist. You're not to go into the military. We need you here. And that was a huge point of contention for him, but he should be proud of that because he was part of the war effort. My grandfather on my father's side was one of the founding members of the fire department where I grew up. He started a business by himself with his wife and built that up to be a business that now my father and brother run. There are tons of achievements in my family's history that I'm proud of, and no one should ever be made to feel like they're not proud of their lineage, proud of their heritage, proud of their history. Were there bad steps in a lot of families in America and their lineage? Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are families descended from, slave owners. There are families descended from slaves. And we can't ignore that. But we also can acknowledge those bad deeds and move forward. How do we make it so that we learn from the lessons of the past and not repeat them and do better? Let the steps behind in the mud be left in the mud, and let the steps forward be to greatness, to bigger and better things. Start that business. Literally nothing is holding anyone back in America these days. Nothing. Your race is certainly not. The only thing slowing you down is you. And so basically I wanted to end this with, the whole argument. Matt Walsh made some very good points, and I agree that, what is a native and where do people belong in the world? And you belong wherever you plant yourself. And wherever you grow and foster and build up from there. So long as it doesn't harm anyone else. And that's, I think, the important part we need to keep in mind. And so that's really all I've got for today. But yeah, that's kind of the point I wanted to make was, the whole what is a native. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.